that I was indeed having a drinking problem, that I was an alcoholic. And I still had a very tiny, fractious practice, very tenuous, but I couldn't go out and say I'm a drunk because that would put that to bed forever. I just didn't want to lose my reputation, little realizing that I actually had no reputation at all, but I didn't want to lose what I thought I had. Therefore, I was just a drunken member of the Oxford group. And it didn't work. And I was, again, very forlorn because I was actively participating in an association of wonderful people. They were sharing all their benefits for me, but I couldn't come back to them with all that I had. So I was just a drunken member of the Oxford group. Again, little realizing that at the time, my salvation was at hand. May of 1935, a fellow by the name of Bill Wilson came to Akron on a business deal that, lucky for us, turned into a total flop. And through friends, Henrietta, he was put in touch with me. And at first, the day that he called, I was too drunk to see him. But the next day, I went out to Henrietta's house, and I met this fellow, Bill Wilson. And right away, another Vermonter, but there was something about him. He was also an Oxford group member, and he had been sober for 6 months. And his sobriety was built on the fact that he was helping other drunks. He was doing the one thing that I wasn't doing, and that was keeping him sober. And that sort of gelled with me. I sort of there realized where my handicap was, the fact that I wasn't making that last step. Well, we had a good meeting, and I got sober. I stopped drinking, got involved with him, and we went out and tried to help other people, but we didn't know what we were talking about, and we didn't get any luck. But I stayed sober, and after a week or so of getting sober, I developed a thirst for knowledge. I had sort of removed myself from the medical field except for my practice, and I knew very little of what's going on. I always liked to attend these medical conventions. There was one going on down in Atlantic City, so I said, let me go and tap into their resources and get my skills back and all that, and little realizing that I couldn't solo. I went off and got fallen down stinking drunk, and I don't even know what happened. I don't even know if I showed up at the meeting, but I wound up back in Akron a couple of days before I had to do a surgical procedure, and I was a mess. And thank God Bill was still there. He didn't go back to New York, and he and my wife, they worked on me for a day or two, and then the day of the operation, with a double of scotch under my belt and a bottle of beer, I went down to the hospital and got through it. And then I made a circuit of the city, and I met with all the people that I had offended with my conduct, and people who I was in debt to, and other people that I had injured with something I might have said. And I begged their forgiveness and admitted to each and every one of them that I had a drinking problem, that I was an alcoholic. And that was the 10th of June, 1935, and to the best of my recollection, I haven't had a drink since. And then, from that day forth, Bill and I, we really went after this with hammer and tongue. And right away, the first guy we got, it gelled. We got a guy that, I didn't want to talk to him. He was a Sunday school superintendent for town. I figured he knew more about Scripture than I did. And that's all we had, was the good book, the Bible. That's all we had. And of the Bible, maybe just three parts of the Bible: the Sermon on the Mount, the book of James, and Paul's letter to the Corinthians, chapter 13. That was the essence of our message, and we'd buttonhole some guy and lay it on him. I don't know how they stood us at all. I mean, I remember one guy I talked to for about 5 hours. That way I think he stayed there as we hit his clothes. But we couldn't get anybody sober because we didn't know what we talked about. We didn't have an idea. I'm a physician for over 30-some. I knew nothing about alcoholism. Nothing at all. Do you remember ever being taught anything about alcoholism? No, I'm sure you did. I mean, I would give the odd lecture to some drunk that would show up at my practice, but I went right down the toilet. I didn't like drunks for patients. They didn't keep their promise. They didn't take our advice. And worst of all, for all of us, they never paid their bills. So I didn't want to have drunks for clients. So how many times did I have people come into my practice with gastritis, gastroenteritis, esophagitis, pancreatitis, sclerosis, and I didn't recognize that if I dug a little deeper, I would have spotted acute alcoholism. I had one guy in my practice one time, he had Ritis syndrome. He had every Ritis disease you know. His skin, his fingernails, his hair fell off before he died. And had I done a proper intake, I'm sure this guy was an alcoholic, but we knew nothing about it. And the Bible tells us if we're going to be good stewards of our time, we have to make the best of it. So I began every night to read as much as possible of what I could at that time on alcoholism. And there was very little written, very, very little written. I still to this day, I mean, up until I got sick a couple of years back, and when Annie died, I read for an hour a day on this topic or in Scripture. But now you don't have to read an hour every day to be good AA. This is what I had to do. The 12 steps weren't written, at the time. We didn't have the 12 steps. We just had the Bible and our own experience. Now, you don't have to believe in the Bible. But I'll go with that. Let me mention one thing. I didn't write the 12 steps. I had nothing to do with the actual writing of the 12 steps. Bill Wilson did that. But I like to think that I played a part in it, because when I went on my last drunk, Bill moved in with us in Ardmore Avenue, and we used to sit up every night until 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning talking about this process of recovery. So I like to think that I had my part in the 12 steps, but all of it was taken out of the Bible. And as I said, you don't have to believe in the Bible to accept the validity of the 12 steps. Euclid, the mathematician, his axioms have never been proven. They're true, but nobody's ever proven them. Euclid's axiom, and yet now we fly in airplanes, we go in tall buildings, we cross over bridges that were built on those axioms. But again, they weren't proven. So you could say the steps are 12 axioms, 12 theories, but are proven in our own recoveries. That's what we have to do. So that was the strength of what we found. But we finally developed this church intangible form of a recovery process, which is the 12 steps, and became an active part of our program, and it began to grow. We also practiced at those times with the 4 absolutes, and they were dropped. I often wish that we had kept them in AA, but it was felt at the time to ask a drunk to do something absolute was to just predict failure. The absolutes were absolute love, absolute unselfishness, absolute purity, and honesty, absolute honesty. And to ask a drunk to do that was too difficult. Had we realized, though, at the time, and I hadn't realized it, I wasn't so proficient in it, that when they failed, and that was important, that just made them need God more. That was the marriage. In trying to do this, we'd need God. And I got to sit down for a while, because there's a couple of other things that I'm still not sure about in Bob's dream, but I may need some help. Absolute honesty comes to us, for us in the program, with we're alcoholics. If we can be absolutely honest in that regard, if we can say to ourselves, I am an alcoholic, then you're past that absolute. When it deals with alcoholism, that's being absolutely honest about ourselves. Unselfishness, well, I used to think giving a drunk a quarter was a nice thing. $50 would get him off my back for a day. Give him $1, he's out of town for a week, That's how I practiced my unselfishness, little realizing that if I took the quarter and bought him a cup of coffee and sat down with him, or took the $1 and bought him a meal and listened to his story and maybe had a chance to tell him my story, well, then I was doing him some good. That's the absolute unselfishness that we're talking about. Giving of self instead of just giving money or something else, a shirt or a pair of shoes or what have you, which I used to also do after I had worn them to the bone, but I still did it. Absolute purity, to do things for the right intention, have the right intention in mind, not to help people to lord over them, to have something on them, to have some control over them, but to do